Okay. Okay, thank you. Let me just share my screen and I'll be right back. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
See my screen? Okay, great. Um, these things sometimes don't work too well. In any case, I'm here to talk about something that those of us who are SDMs, or in my case, currently a technical program manager, tends to be the bane of our existence, and that is status reports and management reporting in general. To start, legal department made me say this. I am here representing myself. I'm not speaking for my company. I'm not giving any specific examples from any one employer. This is a lifetime of experience. So I've said that. We can continue. I'm a tech program manager at a large cloud computing organization who prefer that I don't put their name in writing because I'm not speaking for them, but it's AWS. In the Seattle area, we also have a lot of people in Vancouver, including on my team. These days, I'm managing programs to improve the way we process quadrillions of events per day to support our business. In the past, I managed load balancing, where we supported over 60 terabits per second at times across our network. I love problems of scale, as you might guess. I'm previously an IT consultant. I've been a software development manager. As I said, right now I'm not, but I've gone back and forth. I've been a tech strategist and started as an engineer. I've worked in a bunch of different companies, have the usual academic credentials. And these days I'm living in Seattle with 2 cats, one of whom is looking at me suspiciously and will probably try to join us because that's what he does. I spend a lot of my time in Vancouver, so that's part of the reason I'm part of this group. And I'm originally from New York. Why talk about status reports? Well, as I said at the start, there's something we all have to do regularly. Depending on what our role is, and there goes my buddy. He's loud. They can include program project reports. They can be team reports. There are a variety of other types of management reports I'll talk about later. And some of these are especially challenging at times. The easy ones tend to be the ones that are about a program, sort of singular work stream or a singular deliverable. The others can be a lot more challenging. They are frequently misused, and that causes 2 problems. One is that the thing you're trying to use them for doesn't work. You don't get the result you expect. They're also frequently not used when they should be, and that has the opposite result, and that is that you just are not using a tool that is available to you. Status reports, when done well, provide a permanent record. You should care about this, both for your team, for your program, and for your own career. I find that when I'm at the end of the year and I'm trying to figure out what did I do this year to put in my review with my boss, well, going back through a year of status reports reminds me of that. And they save a lot of time if you use them well. So a little history. The status reports as we know them today, like many things we deal with, originated outside of software in the engineering world. Much of the science and management science that these were part of go back to war planning during World War II. If you look at pictures of factories from World War II, you will see literally walls of project plan with these massive Gantt charts and planners moving pins around to show where things were and what was happening, what was current, what was behind, using different colors. All of this became automated, of course. And as they became automated, sometime back a couple of decades ago, a whole bunch of people started talking about, well, we don't really need to do status reports anymore. They're just going to be automatic. Turns out that didn't really work very well, because what most of your stakeholders tend to want, especially in software, is not a complex Gantt chart or a list of tasks. They want to understand what you're delivering for them and when. And the way you plan your engineering is not really the same worldview as the customer or the internal customer, whoever your end user is. They have a different worldview. And all of that became obsolete when we started doing Agile, which led to its own tools and automation, which also tends to be fairly useless for the purpose of status reporting, because once again, the way we manage our engineering internally and the way we need to communicate to the outside world are very different. Today, this is more of an art than a science, and every company does it differently. And I'd like to bring a little context to that and make some suggestions as to how you can improve things. So what does a good status report do? Well, really, it should do one thing very well, and that is report the situation on your project or team as of the report date. I try to keep the report date as close as possible to the day I'm sending the thing out. I've seen situations where, oh, you'll send something out on Wednesday as of Friday. I try to avoid that kind of thing. People will read it. They will assume it's as of when they get it. So I try to keep those things close. There can be some exceptions. My current team wraps things up on Fridays. If you know anything about sending emails, Friday afternoon is the worst time to send them. So I wait till Monday to send it out as of Friday afternoon. But you want to be predictable. And here is my buddy. I said he'd be here. Weekly is common for bigger programs or projects, or some teams. Bi-weekly may be okay. The key is consistency, and if there's going to be a variation, let people know. I don't send things on holidays. I'll cover 2 weeks, but I'll always make sure that people know it in advance, and also remind them when I send the thing out 2 weeks later. And as I said, think about when to send. Friday afternoons and Monday mornings are a horrible time to send anything. Status report should highlight changes since the previous iteration. It's not a tell me the entire world. It's tell me what happened this week or in this bi-weekly period, whatever the period you're using is. And it's okay. And it's okay to say, we're still working on X. I do that all the time. Still developing new feature. Expect to continue working on it for 3 weeks. That's okay. It's concise and email based. Don't use attachments. One of the biggest mistakes I see is people writing a document and sending it as an attachment. There's actually pretty good studies have been done on this. If you send something as an attachment, you'll lose 70% of your audience. They just won't click on it. It's okay to provide links to further information, and I always like to provide a link to an archive of where all the sorry, my buddy is being very friendly, of where all the status reports are. That's particularly useful if you get someone new. It's great to be able to tell someone, here's all the status reports, go read through them. That'll tell you what's going on or what has been going on. Before you sit down to do this, understand who's your audience, what do they care about, what level of granularity is needed. Status reports should be short in general, but if you find you need a lot of granularity, maybe you have more than one report, maybe there's more than one document. How can you provide the information most succinctly to the right audience? These are general things you should do for any document or any communication. Definitely do it before you start sending out reports for your team or for your project. So how do you arrange this thing? As I said, email only. You know, oh, I don't have my device. Yes, I do. Someone's sitting on it. But assume that your status report is going to be read on a device that looks like this by somebody who is running between meetings and just scrolling through. If you don't make that assumption, you will probably make mistakes, include things that shouldn't be included, not get to the point quickly enough. So email only, because you can read email on this. Simple title. I like to say red, yellow, green. In my current organization, we pretty much settled on brackets with red, yellow, or green as the first thing that goes into the title. And a lot of people filter on that. So their emails will pop into different boxes, or their status reports will pop into different email boxes or email folders, depending on whether it's red, yellow, or green. The ones that are most likely to be red are the ones that are red, followed by yellow. If it's green, a lot of people won't read it. That's one of the things you should assume. One of my mentors like to say that a good status report is a punchline, the current situation, next steps, and then an explanation if you need it. I still find that's a great way to think about it. So the punchline is really just today's date, name of the project or program, the expected delivery date, whatever you're working on, who owns it, and what's the status. Current situation is a few sentences, really an executive summary. Sometimes it's more than just a few sentences, but if you've gone more than 3 paragraphs, it's probably too long. Next steps. What are your current issues? Are there any important missed items or setbacks? This tends to be a lot of what your stakeholders are looking for. As I said, green projects get the least attention because just saying, hey, everything's fine is not something that makes people worry. And if they don't worry, they will move on to the next thing. But talking about issues, talking about important missed items, tends to be critical for your stakeholders. And then explanations and details. You may include tables or limited graphics. Again, think about what will work on a phone. This is a good place to use links. I typically have a link farm at the end. There's something in the, somebody said something in the chat. What's a link farm? It's the long list of links that you will see at the end of a document. I've heard that referred to as a link farm. It's not a universal term. It is a term I've used, but it's basically, it's a place where you plant all your links. So a link farm. I also, as appropriate, include links directly in the text. If I'm referring to another project or to another activity, and there is a document, a wiki, anything else that explains that, I'll include direct links in the text as well. And finally, I always put a link to my archive at the end. As I said at the beginning, this is a status report is an email, but you can copy it to a document and save it. And I encourage you to do that and keep them in a place where people can look back at them and where you can look back at them. Okay. There. I'm going to talk about writing a little bit. Most important parts of the report beyond the red, yellow, green are in narrative text. General writing rules: avoid jargon, avoid terms that aren't going to be well understood. We are mostly all engineers in our background, and we tend to drop into a lot of engineering language. I know I do this myself all the time. But some of your stakeholders are not engineers. So make sure you're thinking about, will the average person on that email list understand this? Be specific, hard numbers. If the number is 602, don't say several hundred. If the number is somewhere between 600 and 700, say that. Get as precise as you can. Same with dates, and avoid what we call at my current employer weasel words. Those are words like more, a lot, significant amount, next month. Get as close to detail as you can. Add links where they can provide extra detail. I do this all the time. Most of my status reports are full of links, but don't expect that people are going to depend on them, or don't depend on people clicking them to understand what you want to tell them. I've seen this a lot. This is a huge mistake. I have seen one recently where it ended up being a 3-page long document attachment with links all over the place. And then 2 weeks later, the question came, well, didn't you know you were supposed to do this thing? It was in our status report. You clicked on the links, right? And the reality is, well, actually, I didn't even click on the link to open the status report because there was nothing that told me I should open this 3-page document in the title. And like all of us, I get 100 emails a day, more than 100 emails a day. I can't read everything if there's no call to action, and neither can your stakeholders. And always write in a pyramid form. I actually have a slide on what that is, with an example here. And you don't have to read the whole thing, but if you read these two, if you do look at these two side by side, you'll see that one gets to the point, the other hides the point. And again, speaking as engineers, this example on the left is how we tend to think, and as a result, how we tend to write. We think in terms of perform an activity, perform another activity, perform another activity, perform another activity, perform another activity, maybe do some testing, do some validation, get a result at the end, come to a conclusion. And the conclusion ends up being stated way at the end. Again, it's going to be read on this device. If the conclusion is way at the end, 3 paragraphs down, a lot of people will never get that far. So if you're trying to say, hey, the queen died today, put it at the top. Don't tell the whole story of how you got there. You can tell that story, but make sure you get the point across at the top, starting in the title. This is true for any business writing, by the way. Use of tables and data. I do use tables a lot, especially for teams and projects where we have a lot of milestones, or teams where we have a lot of different activities going on, and it's difficult to sum it all up in text. I'll very often put a table with major milestones we are working on and highlight them with color, red, yellow, green for each one. Where do we stand? And then a brief, somewhere in that table, just a brief one-liner, what's going on. Remember, less is more. Again, it's going to be read potentially on a mobile device. When you're using tables, be directionally consistent. I saw that this week in a review with a vice president, where the person who is an extremely competent and experienced manager had 2 tables, one after the other. And on one table, she was measuring progress going up. And on the other table, she was measuring progress as a burn down. And the VP kind of looked at all this and said, hold it, is plus good or bad? And the answer, of course, was it's both. It should never be both. And he actually asked her, hey, in the future, could you figure out how to make these both consistent? Think about that. It should always be obvious what it is. And one of the ways to keep things obvious, just basic UX, it should always be obvious how to use it. One of the ways to keep it obvious is to keep it consistent. Make sure you're reporting data and metrics that matter to your stakeholders. Again, a lot of the things we do internally in engineering don't matter to anybody but the engineering team working on them. I've seen that mistake a lot, probably more than anything else I've seen. It's the explaining the issues we had coding a new API and the various architectural issues we were dealing with to develop it, to deploy it, how it interfaced with other things. The status report wasn't going to anybody who was concerned. There may be interesting learnings in all that, and there are good ways to communicate those, but a status report isn't one of them, and I'll address that later. And yeah, you can, if you have any really big tables or graphs or dashboards, link to it. Use of graphics, same thing, especially if you're reporting anything operational. Charts are great. They can be useful on big initiatives to monitor task completion, burn downs, things of that nature. Use with caution. You don't want a status report that's just all graphs. And again, basic UX principle, meaning should always be obvious, directionally consistent. And if whatever it is you are reporting, like in addition to my regular status report, I do an ops report every week. Well, the ops report I link to an external dashboard. It just doesn't make sense for me to copy and paste a bunch of graphs when there is a real-time dash that anybody can look at. Special situation, really not that special for those of us who are SDMs. We're asked to put together a report for team status. This one's challenging because a team doesn't have a status unless the team is working exclusively on one initiative, in which case the team report and the initiative or program report are the same thing. But usually a team does have a defined number of projects and goals. Not every work stream is a project or goal. This is a mistake I've seen a lot of managers make. I had one manager a while back tell me, well, my team of 9 people has 18 projects going on right now. No, it doesn't. It doesn't have 18 projects. You have 18 work streams that interconnect in various ways that really all are driving towards 2 or 3 goals that your team is responsible for. Think of it that way. If you can send out separate reports for the active projects or programs, that's ideal. As I said, if you really think a single team has more than 3 going on at once, are you really sure it's 3 projects? It usually isn't. Remember that the team or organization structure is not a project list. And if you have to combine them into one report, which right now I do every week, actually for an organization with 4 teams, I make sure I put a heading at the top with an executive summary and overall status for each, and then the details sequentially below. There are a lot of different ways you can organize this. It will vary somewhat. It will vary somewhat by organization. This is one of the places where internal links within the report to jump to something below can make sense if that works within your particular email platform, which often it doesn't. Another special situation is full organizational reports. These are usually more monthly or quarterly. They're usually not an email, typically have a business focus. These are often called business reviews, monthly business reviews, quarterly business reviews, or updates. And they're usually reporting on truly a large number of initiatives. A lot of the same approaches I talked about here apply to these, and you should borrow from them as much as you can. But something like a quarterly business review really kind of goes beyond the scope of discussing status reports. Feel free to ask me. I have opinions, but I won't get into a lot of detail here. The good thing about these is most organizations, at the very least, have some sort of standard template for these. So generally, you're ahead of the game in that sense. Anti-patterns. I've referred to a bunch of these, but let me highlight them all. First of all, just making it too long. I think someone once said that if you really need more than 2 pages for a team or program report, then you've either had a really, really bad week, or there is something there that you can cut. The next bunch of anti-patterns are using a status report to do something it's not intended for. This first one I see a lot, using a status report to drive a project. Someone will send out a status report that is 3 pages long with I think I was talking about this one before, with lots of links and explanations and links to further documentation and tasks assigned and due dates mentioned. If you're assigning somebody tasks, send an email assigning them the task, or assigning or asking them to perform the task, depending on what your authority and the nature of your organization is. Burying it in a status report guarantees it'll get missed. The same for any of these other things: asking for resources, asking for a scope change, asking for a timeline change. A status report is not the place to do it. You may want to mention in your status report that this week, as a result of something that happened in your work, you have made a request for a scope change, but that shouldn't be where you announce it. That should be where you just happen to mention that as one of the things that happened this week. If you're asking for scope change or asking for resources, there should be an email to the person who can approve the scope change or who can approve the resources. That person may not read your status report. Don't bury it there. A status report is not a PR document. I've seen this mistake a lot. For some reason in the past 2 years, I think really with COVID, with so many of us not encountering each other in person, I think a lot of managers have been looking for ways to make sure to mention their teams, mention their engineers, highlight who's doing what. And that's a good intention, but it gets, as with so many other things, if you bury it in a status report, it will be missed by most people. And when people do see it, it will either come off badly or just be ignored. It's one of those things that when I see it, it's, hold it, this is a status report. Why are you offering congratulations to somebody in the middle of it? I mean, that's something you should do, just not in the status report. Another anti-pattern: delaying sending because you've got a late update. Your status is red, but you're waiting on input from that one team that could take you to green. So I won't send it at my usual time on my usual day. I'll wait till tomorrow morning. The problem with that one is tomorrow morning, that team isn't there either. And you wait another day, and it eventually gets not sent. Status report is a report at a moment in time. Use it that way. If you're red on Friday afternoon or whatever your cycle is, that's what you should report. And if anybody is concerned, well, sometimes you have to send a follow-up email 2 days later saying, yeah, we were red Friday afternoon, and by Monday 10 a.m. we were green again. That's better than not sending it. Another one I've seen people do is just a long list of tasks, milestones, dates. They're color coded in various shades of red, yellow, or green. I once saw somebody try to use everything from dark red to light red to dark yellow to light yellow into various shades of green. Don't overcomplicate it. And it was just a long list of tasks that were not particularly meaningful. The other one I pointed out, long list of engineering tasks and activities. A lot of your stakeholders aren't going to care about the how. So don't spend too much time on it unless Okay, I'm reading some of the comments. Yeah, good comment here. Some people are red-green colorblind. So yes, I use color coding, but I also type in red, yellow, green. And if you try to do all kinds of complex shading, that'll get lost on some people. And again, remember, these screens are pretty good, but they're small. You're not going to really track careful shading. Oh, I do color code. The comment, we color code here. I color code everything, but I color code red, yellow, green. I don't try to get more granular in my coloring. Some people disagree. But where was I? Oh, I was talking about it's not a list of engineering tasks unless, and remember at the start I said, figure out who your stakeholders are and what they care about. If you are in the amazingly lucky position to be communicating only with other engineers, then yeah, maybe you can dive into a lot of engineering speak. That is rare for status reports. If you know of a job where you can only be communicating with other engineers, please send it my way. That would make life so much easier for all of us. Sending out a report that nobody can understand unless they click on links to MS Project, Jira, or whatever tool it is you're using. Again, you lose 70% of your audience if they have to click through to find the meaning. Links are okay to use, and in fact are encouraged to use to provide extra information, but you shouldn't need them to understand the basics of what the report is telling you about. I've seen a lot of status reports that start with an introductory paragraph explaining what the team or program is. It's fair to assume that people receiving a status report for your team or project know what it's about. That's another thing that you can include a link. If there's a team document or a wiki or a project doc that explains things in greater detail, include the link. Again, just in the interest of brevity of getting directly to the point, so people don't just drop off after reading the first two paragraphs. Don't over include that stuff. Oops. Go away. He's very friendly. And oh, sorry. I was just reading a comment there. And one of the biggest mistakes is assuming the report is regularly read by everybody. Most people will read them most of the time. They won't necessarily read all the way through, and they won't necessarily read every time. As I said, if you are trying to drive a project, to ask for resources, to do anything that requires somebody to read, understand, and respond, that should be a separate communication. Okay, what about all that other stuff? Announcements, feature updates, new tooling. Recently, a team that I work with introduced some new tooling that we've been waiting on for months, and nobody did anything with it. And finally, 2 weeks later, somebody sent out an email saying, hey, how come nobody's used this new tool? We've shipped it 2 weeks ago. And my response was, well, where was the announcement? Well, we put it in our status report. What status report? Oh, don't you get our status report? I went and looked at the distribution list. There were 6 people on their status report distribution list, And if I had read it, it was at the bottom of the second page. That's not a place to announce something. Requests for any kind of review or comment, send a separate email. You want to announce promotions on your team, send a promo email, send a new hire email, send a thank you to somebody who's leaving, or maybe thank God somebody is leaving. Well, maybe that's not an email you should send out, but there are correct ways to announce and document all these. Every organization does it a little bit differently. The status report is not the right place. There may be some things, especially in a team report, there may be a line for, current staffing. Are you fully staffed? Are you looking to hire? But that's a line item. It's not introducing my new person or congratulating somebody on an achievement. So, general advice. My first director in my current job would always look at everything I wrote and go through literally line by line. And his most common question was, so what? Why are you including this in this document? Who cares? Ask that a lot. It will really help your writing in general and especially help your status reports. Ask, will somebody stop reading when they get to this? Is there some incredibly dense text that's hard to understand, that's full of jargon, that is referring to team internals that nobody but you knows? Will they just, get to that point in the scroll and drop it? Get rid of that. Ask, does this item require a separate email? If you're announcing something, yes, it does. Ask if management's reading this on their phones on the bus and they get to their stop halfway through, or think of whatever example you can of a manager scrolling through and reading things. You see people walking around office buildings, reading things all the time. Will they still get the point? This is why I bring up the pyramid style writing. Put the point at the top. And if your status report's longer than 2 pages, it's either an incredibly active week or you can cut it down. I have seen one VP in my current organization, a very senior VP, who receives weekly reports that are also at the VP level, so covering entire organizations. He expects every single one of those to be 1 page or less. Well, he expects them to be exactly 1 page in a specific format. Because the higher you go up the chain, people don't have more and more time. So you have to give them a more and more condensed version of events and more important, or more and more focus on the important things. If it's longer than 2 pages, it's probably too long. Summary, status report, reports on recent updates. It's the updates that matter to your stakeholders, not to your internal team. The collection over time, document overall progress on the things your stakeholders care about. And as I said, they're great to have at the end of the year when you need to document to somebody, what have I done this year to earn my salary? It's not a substitute for other communication. It's not a link to some favored project or program management tool, no matter how amazing the tool may be. And most of them are really not amazing. I've used them all. And should be as concise as possible. That's really all I have to say. This guy in the back, the black and white guy, is the one who's been interfering this entire conversation. His name's Flash, and that is Mish Mish up front. She never stands still enough for photos, so this was a lucky one. And I'll take any questions you have right now.
I had a question, Michael.
Okay, sure.
That was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
It seems to me like, well, I guess it's a double-edged sword, but what about the standardization of status reports? Like surely for the efficiency of the organization, people are brought into the fold with regards to how those status reports are meant to be presented, are meant to be ingested, and there could be some standardization. What are your thoughts on that?
Most of the organizations I've been part of standardize at least to some degree. I find that the higher you go up the organization, the more standardized they are, because they do make it a lot more efficient to read them for someone who's reading a lot of them. So yeah, I like standardizing. I like also driving changes to the standards where they make sense. So, feel free to use any of these comments as if you think there are certain things that aren't being included in your standard format, ask why not. It may or may not be worth the trouble. Where I am right now, we put a lot of emphasis on team independence. So within organizations, we tend to have standards, but not very much across the whole company. Other places I've worked have much more standardized formats across the company. Standardization is great if the standard template is good. If the standard template is bad, then that just means everybody puts out bad status reports. And unfortunately, I've seen that way too much. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the key point is like, if the standard, if whatever the existing standard is poor, improve the standard.
Yeah. Anything else? I went longer than I thought I would.
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, let me pull that up. How do you keep track of everyone's work? Usually with whatever tool we're using, and I'm thinking in terms of an engineering team, we are usually tracking task completion in some sort of tool. It may be Jira. Where I am right now, we've got our own internal tool. It may be something else, but typically there is some tool that you're using to track your sprints or your engineering activity. And that's usually what I'm basing it on. I have done it with something as simple as Post-it notes on a whiteboard, where there was nothing else. Generally, that's not a great practice these days, but sometimes at a summary level, I'll keep track of it in a spreadsheet, but again, usually driven by some tool that the organization or the team has settled on for for tracking work. For a more operational team, it may just be in tickets. Does that answer that question? Okay, and performance appraisal, boy, performance appraisals would be a great subject for a presentation in and of itself. It really goes beyond status reports. And if you want to hear about performance appraisals, as I said about other things, I've got lots of opinions and would be happy to talk about them at some point. Just a thought. Yeah, there are a lot of different ways of doing performance appraisals, as everyone can guess. And as I said, I've got opinions, but that's way beyond my scope today. Anything else?
Oh, sorry.
I
Yeah,
was going to say, I potentially have a hypothetical question for you here.
Go for it.
And it's hypothetical in the sense of, we'll say that we're living in a world with no constraints. You can do whatever it is that makes sense that's going to result in the best outcomes, is kind of the first half. And then I guess the second half of the question is, where you are now or anywhere you've ever been, would this be possible? If we acknowledge that okay, we're going to put green, yellow, or red in the email, and it's going to get filtered into people's various inboxes. And let's just say that the standard is we fully expect that anything that's marked green, nobody's ever going to look at. They're just going to look at the yellow and red. Well, then if it's green, why are we still writing status reports? Is there a value there in doing that if we know nobody's looking at those?
I'll put it this way. I wouldn't assume nobody is looking at those. I would assume that they will get less critical attention. The additional thing is, it's great to have that history. Even if all you're saying is, we had a great week, we delivered these items. Having the history written somewhere has benefited me more times than I can think, when I had to look back and say, and answer, well, when did we deliver this? When was this done? Taking your hypothetical to the extreme, in a perfect world, a lot of this would not be necessary at all. Most of the tools we use, most of the management tools we use, when it comes right down to it, exist because we live in an imperfect world.
But is that imperfect because of the challenges that we faced, or imperfect in the sense of the challenges of structuring an organization in the first place?
Both. And I think the two are interrelated, again, to get a little philosophical. If you knew exactly what the challenges were that you faced, it would be a lot easier to structure the perfect organization for them. Our challenge is, we never know exactly what the challenges are that we're going to face or when. And the toughest challenges, I'll be honest, to me are not the technological ones, they're the human ones. So what generates all this uncertainty? It's mostly the human factor. The world is imperfect, people are imperfect. Therefore, we need these tools to help move us to a more perfect future. Recognizing that we will find new problems to trip us up.
That's great. Thanks.
Sure. That's a good interview question, by the way. Anybody else?
Sure, I did have one thing. Thank you
Sure.
for that, by the way. That was great. I think I have a comment and a question. I think they're both colored by the fact that I don't actually write a lot of status reports in my day-to-day. We're kind of a startup scale up. So
Sure.
my comment is, I still thought it was a great presentation. I thought there was a lot of good technical writing tips and a lot of things for me to think about in the future. So even not writing status reports is still very
Sure.
helpful. My question is, so we're not writing a lot of stats reports. We're generally doing kind of what you said, maybe not to do, which is, point somebody to a dashboard, maybe some fancy Kanban stuff going on there. When is that process going to fall down for us, do you think? Or do you think it already is and we just wouldn't be noticing it yet?
Let me ask, how big is the organization?
So we're about 40 people and engineering is 15-ish.
Engineering 15-ish. I would say that when you get to around 50 engineers, you start having to more formally document what everybody's doing. With 15, it's very easy for everybody to maybe not know what everybody's doing, but know what everybody who matters to you is doing. One of the important numbers to keep in mind when dealing with people is 7. We can usually track up to about 7 things or 7 people simultaneously. So if you have 15 people, well, every one of them can probably keep fairly good track of about what half the organization is doing. That's really good. Once you get up to 30 to 50, it becomes really hard for everybody to know what everybody else is doing, and you need some more structure, both to the organization itself, and the structure to the organization itself will tend to force some more formal reporting, probably less formal and less onerous than in a much bigger organization. Although you'd be surprised, I've worked for some small organizations where, because they were tightly regulated, had to have a lot of internal reporting very early on in the game. And right now I'm working for a huge organization, but because one of our, not really core values, but one of the internal core religions really is around team independence, we tend to be a lot less structured than many smaller organizations are, because, well, yes, I work for this huge company, but really my relationship to most of the rest of the company is they're an API out there. I can call them, but I don't need to know much beyond their API. At least that's the idealized version. It's not reality, but that is sort of the religion. So we tend not to be as formal as many other organizations are. That answer?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just wanted to add in there, there's a number out there called Dunbar's number, which indicates like the amount that you can be, I mean,
7.
socially intimate, but it's about 150 people essentially. Yeah.
That I'm thinking of, I forgot what 7 plus or minus 2 is. There's also a term for it, and I forget what it is.
Yeah, there's a couple of terms out there, but I just wanted to put it out there that Dunbar's number specifically is like, can you have what size of group can you have before people start not knowing each other anymore? So at 150 roughly, you're going to be like, oh, who's that new guy? I never met him before. Versus under 150 roughly, you can always be like, oh, I know everyone here.
Yeah, that's 150 for the full organization, or for most companies that would be about 50 in engineering. That's kind of where the number comes from. But yeah, somewhere in that range. That's a good comment. Yeah, once you've got more than 150 people, you need formality, because informal connections aren't enough.
Well, and speaking of creating new problems, I think one of the fun problems you can look forward to, Mike, is that you'll reach a scale where you need status reporting because of the size you've grown to, and then you'll grow more and you'll actually reach a point where it doesn't scale, where now you've got so many status reports going to so few people that they aren't reading the green ones. They're not even reading the yellow ones. They really only have time to look at the reds.
Right.
And now you're spending a huge amount of time generating all of this information that nobody's actually reading. So that's one of the things that I found interesting to do with status reporting, and I don't necessarily have a solution to. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. But there is a limited span of control there. And if you're a VP trying to oversee 40 to 50 different initiatives, weekly status reports for each of those, it's not a scalable solution.
The solution, and this is really hard for growing organizations, I've seen a lot of them fall down on this. The right solution is delegate, delegate, delegate. But if you are the founder of a startup, you tend not to want to give up your baby. It is one of the hardest periods for a company to go through. I have worked for 2 companies that fell down precisely at that stage because the founder could no longer manage everything, but was not willing to say, hey, you take this and, report red, yellow, green to me for all of that stuff once a month, which is what really needed to happen. Some interesting conversation going on. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I had a
I
question.
think go ahead.
You talked about email almost religiously, and I'm sure this
Yes.
reflects, the state of things maybe at AWS. But is email just because it's the lowest common denominator? Because I wanted to ask, I mean, yeah, everybody has a tool or a mechanism or a device that can read email, so hence email. But one piece that I have tried to include is acknowledgement. And of course, with email, it's very difficult to acknowledge. It's actually a much more of a lift for somebody to say, got it, received, whatever, than to say, click on an emoji in a status report channel or something like that. What are your thoughts? More meetings. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, email is the lowest common denominator. It's the one that can be read on the most devices. There are certainly organizations, and I'd say, younger, newer organizations that are starting with newer tooling right off the bat, might be able to set a higher common denominator than, oh, it has to be an email. I actually think that would be a good thing. If there was some other mechanism that you could guarantee that everybody had access to, and that everybody was using well because it's part of the culture, part of how the organization operates, that would be great. In a lot of ways, I really hate email. It is such a archaic way of communicating in so many ways, but it does tend to be the lowest common denominator. I haven't seen a great substitute for it. Sometimes we have Slack or email groups that are mirrored in Slack so that we can take the discussion offline or take the discussion to a place that is not email. That can be done. And as I said, if you're starting from better tooling, and I think there is better tooling out there, then you might have a better solution.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Sure. I mean, one of the downsides to where I work is that we tend to want to invent everything ourselves. So I think there are a lot of tools we do miss out on that would foster that kind of discussion more effectively than just doing it in email.
Well, it's funny too, because it's the same manifestation of the problem you were talking about of don't put things in the status report that don't belong in the email. One example of here is a risk issue and decision log. It's like, great, we put that in our status report, but that's not where it gets actioned. It gets, all those things get commented on in 4 different spaces. It's like,
Right.
that's the wrong spot for the status to put that in the status report. I guess it's the same question. Is it the wrong spot to put the status report in the email versus having a custom tool just for doing that?
Yeah. I can think of a lot of different types of tooling that would make sense to build for this. I don't really have enough initiative right now to want to go off and build it. But interesting idea. Anything else? Shot of whiskey. Yeah, I could use one. It's been one of those days. Oh, GitHub issues. That's an interesting way of doing it. I didn't think about that. Interesting thought. Anyway, if there's nothing else, I can wrap up this and we can go back to discussion.
All right, I think like we are all good. Thanks so much, Michael, for giving us a talk and also bouncing ideas with like the group here
Sure.
as well. So
A
thanks so
small
much.
group today, so we could easily do this. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really great.